Hello everybody, my name's Wolf, and through this series of videos I'm going to explain to you the crazy, over-the-top world that nerds like me love so much, that is Warhammer 40,000. So get comfy, strap in, and prepare for a Noob-Splaining session. The Sisters of Battle are tough, really tough, tougher than a $2 steak. In fact, they are so tough they spent 3 weeks on Fenris fighting the Space Wolves, which is about 2.9 weeks longer than any other faction would survive, and most of them got to go home. So this week we're talking about the faction created because of this prick, a man named Goj Van Dyer, and a loophole in the law. So let's start with their history. So the year is 30,000. The Great Crusade has nearly reconquered the galaxy, and Emperor Chris has pretty much managed to eradicate all forms of religion. Then Horus did his whole heresy thing and really fucked up Emperor Chris's day. In fact, so hard, it fucked up all his following days too. So then we skip forward a few years to the year 32,000, roughly, and the Temple of the Saviour that worships Emperor Chris as a god is made the de facto religion of the Imperium. Except for the Mechanicum, because, well, toasters. By the year 36,000, the Church of the Ecclesiarchy, as it is known, has amassed as much, if not more, political power, resources, and armed forces than the Imperial Administratum itself. It got to the point that the Church was able to influence most political decisions. Obviously it did this in its favour. Around this time, a man called Goj Van Dyer was appointed the head of the Administratum. Turns out, Van Dyer was an excellent politician. When I say excellent, I mean he was a shrewd, cunning, paranoid megalomaniac that desired power and was happy to lie, cheat, steal, and even murder those who don't share his beliefs that he should run it all. It's comforting to know that in 38,000 years' time, politics won't change at all. Anyway, Van Dyer had to share power with the Church, and being batshit crazy, he wasn't happy about that. So he did the only thing a nutjob like him would do: kill the leader of the Church and assume the role of the prophet of the Emperor and the leader of the Administratum at the same time, making him the most powerful person in the galaxy. At this point, what is called the Reign of Blood begins. Van Dyer used the Church's immense wealth to raise fleets and sent them out to subdue any planet that showed even the slightest whiff of not being utterly subservient to him. His batshit crazy hit new highs, where he would have massive arguments with himself and claim he was being spoken to by Emperor Chris. Sometimes he wouldn't even bother with that excuse and just have the person who witnessed it killed, depending if he was in an angry mood or less angry mood. He often flew into rages over the slightest thing, which regularly resulted in another fleet being raised and another planet burning. One day he was informed of a martial cult of only women called the Daughters of the Emperor that worshipped Emperor Chris while training in every form of combat they could, and were based on some backwater planet that barely had electricity. Instead of flying into a rage as usual, he went to the planet and told all the women of the cult that he was the prophet of the Emperor. So naturally they told him to fuck off. Instead he said, "The Emperor will protect me, so shoot me." So they did. The shot was absorbed in a bright white light, and every member of the sisterhood fell to their knees and started worshipping Van Dyer as if he was the prophet. Turns out Van Dyer had a personal shield on his belt, but with this being a backwater planet, the sisterhood had no idea such things existed. He took the sisterhood and declared them his personal bodyguard, renaming them the Brides of the Emperor. Van Dyer then used the immense wealth and power of both the Church and the Administratum to arm them with the finest ceramite power armour and with bolters, flamers and melter weapons. They then spent every waking moment either training harder than ever before or being even further brainwashed into how Van Dyer is the second coming of the Emperor. All during this time, Van Dyer is still raising fleets and burning planets and having his Church spread his word and generally making everyone more miserable than a lawyer that can't lie. Eventually, one guy got sick of this, and as one of Van Dyer's priests was conducting another brainwashing propaganda sermon, he shoved him off the balcony and told everyone listening how evil, cruel and batshit crazy Van Dyer is. Now naturally, when you tell a bunch of religious nutters that the main religious nutter they look up to and hang on to every word he says is actually bad for them, they immediately listen to what you say instead of grabbing their pitchforks after witnessing you murdering one of their own right in front of them. But the plot needed it to happen, so obviously they all start backing the new guy immediately. With this newfound support, the new guy decides to head to Holy Terror to tell Van Dyer in person that he is not a nice man and needs to step down. Along the way, he picked up even more followers, including some Space Marines. As no official reason was given as to why Space Marines joined into what was basically looking like a civil war in the Church, I can only assume they heard what was happening and muscle memory kicked in. Van Dyer got wind of this, so raised the biggest armada the Imperium has ever seen, even bigger than the one that was defending Cadia before. Okay, I'm not going there again. So this fleet departs Terra and is immediately swallowed in a warp storm called the Emperor's Wrath. But naturally, Van Dyer is too much of a megalomaniac to take the hint. The new guy's armada arrives at Earth, and his followers quickly take over most of Van Dyer's compound, with him locked in his main palace with his fanatical brides of the Emperor defending him. Things soon lead to a stalemate that lasted several weeks. So the Space Marines who tagged along said, "We will deal with this," and took over storming the palace. This soon led to a stalemate that lasted several months. You see, the Sisters have power armour and bolters just like the Marines, but the brides of the Emperor, as they are now calling themselves, are fully 7 sheets to the wind religious nutjobs, and being a religious nutjob goes a long way in a fight. Eventually, a couple of custodies noticed all the fuss going on, and at first thought the Space Marines were up to their old tricks of heresy, so went down there all pissed demanding to know what was going on. When they were told what was happening, they managed to get inside Van Dyer's palace, grab the top 5 of the brides in charge, and take them to see Emperor Chris in his throne room. Imagine being able to not only meet your god, but also you're the first living beings in 6,000 years to meet him. This was a big deal. So in they went, and a few hours later they emerged with a fire in their eyes and declared they are now again the daughters of the Emperor. There's a joke there about can't make your mind up. What the Emperor said to them nobody knows, but they then marched straight through the Space Marine lines back into the palace like a Karen on a mission to return an item to a Walmart. I can imagine that now. This bolt's shit, money back now. Anyway, in they marched straight up to Van Dyer, and I'm paraphrasing a little here, but the lead daughter said, "You're a heretic that has turned your back on Emperor Chris and profaned his name, for this you must die." Van Dyer, being a megalomaniac so detached from reality, simply said, "I am too busy to die." So using her sword, she expertly removed his head from his body, ruining what had been, up to that point, a good day for him. So the new guy takes over the church and separates it back out from the administratum. A law is passed ruling the church can no longer have men at arms to limit its military power, so naturally all the men get drafted to the guard, and the daughters of the Emperor become the Adeptus Sororitas, with their fighting forces becoming known as Sisters of Battle. The Sisters then go on a mad recruitment drive, and today nearly every planet has a garrison of Sisters protecting the churches and holy sites of Emperor Chris. Now, don't be fooled into thinking they are just defenders of church property, because you see, that's just what they do when they have some spare time. Most of the time they are training or praying, but the real use of the Sisters is to be unleashed on the non-believers, the heretics and Xenos races as a punishment. And I mean unleashed. As their battle doctrine matured over the years, they make heavy use of bolter, flamers and melters. Basically they shoot and burn everything in sight until all that is left is burned, charred lumps of whatever it used to be. And they do this twice, just to make sure. All while singing hymns, presumably to drown out the screams of their enemies being burned alive. Many people consider the Sisters just female Space Marines, which does neither a justice. Yes, they both use power armour and love bolters, flamers and melter guns, but the Sisters love those weapons to such an extent their infantry can pretty much only take a bolter, a flamer or a melter. They don't have the genetic enhancements of the Space Marines, nor do they have the black carapace, meaning they can't get 100% out of their power armour, but they train that hard it is negligible. They are not as tough or as fast as a Space Marine, but what they lack in brute power they make up for with zealous devotion to the Emperor and a penchant for war crime weaponry. If the Guard is a sledgehammer and the Space Marines a scalpel, the Sisters are a sword, a big fuck off sword that also happens to be on fire. Technically one of the newest factions in the game's timeline, so many people also make the mistake of thinking they are also new to the game in our timeline. This is down to the fact that at the back end of 5th edition, their codex was printed in a White Dwarf, the official Games Workshop magazine. In reality, their first ever codex was 2nd edition, making them one of the first 8 playable factions to the game. Now this codex has less choice of troops than the current League's codex, and only a single vehicle, the Humble Rhino. As they weren't super popular, they didn't get fresh models and a new codex for ages. Now this was normal at the time, as the rule changes from each edition were that subtle you used the most recent codex that Games Workshop had released. So for all of 2nd, 3rd, 4th and the bulk of 5th edition, Sisters players were using 2nd edition points and special rules for them. It wasn't until the Chapter House debacle and the release of 6th happened that every faction got a codex every edition. Well, almost. These days they have a lot more units and vehicles to choose from, and the models look way better than the original metal sculpts. I suppose I need to talk about their version of a dreadnought. Eldar dreadnoughts are piloted by souls. The Space Marine ones are life support units with big fucking guns. The Sisters dreadnoughts are piloted by cowards or traitors who suffer immense pain until they die, which is a lovely thought. Now I can see this video is already going on too long, but enough people watch it I will do a full breakdown into their units. But for now, that's enough for this week. See you next time. And there we have it. That brings us to the end of this video. If you laughed or learnt anything, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. And if you are already subscribed, then don't forget to share this video with somebody who could do with some noob-splaining in their life. Also, leave a comment on your favourite part. I do try and interact with every comment. But if you made it this far, thank you, and I'll see you next time.